We're about to begin our first afternoon session. I'm Michael Bird. I'm the Outreach Coordinator for the South Asia Language and Area Center, as well as the Committee on Southern Asian Studies at the University of Chicago. Our logo is right up here. Our website's southasia.uchicago.edu, and we have a lot of resources on our website. I'm sure it's found in your pamphlet, or I'll have newsletters on the table here after the workshop that you can pick up. So, our next speaker is an associate professor of sociology at Long Island University. Professor Syed is a sociologist working at Long Island University, Brooklyn since 2003. His research interests are broadly focused on issues surrounding migration, immigrant assimilation, ethnicity, and religion. He has conducted ethnographic research among Muslims in Hyderabad, India, South Asians in the US, and migrants in Dubai. Ali has published several articles in academic journals, including one on migrants in Dubai, Permanent Impermanence, in the spring 2010 issue of Contexts. His book, Dubai Gilded Age, was published in spring of 2010 with Yale University Press. Please join me in welcoming Professor Ali.
So Dubai, as many of you may know, is what Virginia Parks earlier called a global city. It's a hub for people and for companies and finance for most of the world. The US, not so much, but certainly for Europe, definitely for Asia, especially South Asia, and very much so, and increasingly so for Africa. I went to Dubai with the intention of doing research among second-generation migrants who were born there, and because my main area of study is immigrant assimilation, and Dubai was especially intriguing to me because the population there is well over 90% foreigners who can never ever attain any kind of citizenship, and basically they're prevented legally and socially and politically from ever assimilating. So the question to me was, how do people get by in a place? How do people grow up in a place where you can never become part of that place? And in any case, what would you be assimilating to anyway when the population of locals is so incredibly small? And it provided an interesting contrast to studies of immigrant assimilation that I've been doing here in the US and that other people have done in the US and in Europe. It was also interesting to me that these people who mostly left Dubai for college and for work, who grew up in Dubai, they came back. And they come back just as you would go to Dubai. They came back on tourist visas. They came back on residency visas like anyone else who would go to Dubai. And the question for me was, given that it's this authoritarian state where you have no rights, why would you come back? Anyway, after I came back to the US, I started thinking more broadly about what makes Dubai Dubai. And I came to the conclusion that the main thing that makes Dubai tick is its system of keeping labor under control on what they call the kafala system, which is a system of keeping everybody on these short-term renewable visas. And this kafala system really colors everything that goes on there. It structures consumerism, work relations, working conditions, interpersonal relations between migrants and nationals, between migrants and the states, and even between nationals and nationals and nationals in the states. So everything about Dubai, and more broadly about the entire Arabian Gulf countries of Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Oman, Kuwait, Qatar, one more, I'm forgetting offhand. They all have, what's it? Bahrain, thank you very much. They all have the same exact system. Bahrain actually has begun to change their system, but what's happening now with the repression that they're going through, it'll be interesting to see what they do with the kafala system. Anyway, this kafala system, it works very well for the government and for private companies because it makes labor very pliant and it keeps them very docile. So people are not going to raise their heads to challenge their employers, and they're not going to raise their heads to challenge the government in any way. The other thing that structures how things work in Dubai and in Abu Dhabi and the rest of the Gulf generally is public relations, PR. The Gulf rulers especially are playing a game of one-upsmanship with each other, and they're trying to create international brand names and attention, especially in the last 10 years or so. And the hope is that it'll lead to more tourists and it'll lead to more resident migrants coming into their places and more international accolades. They're really playing a status game as well as a financial game. So everything in the Gulf, as you may know, has to be the most luxurious, the biggest, the first, the best, right? Everything is that way. And it ranges from the cars that people drive to the kinds of clubs that are there to things like the Palm Islands and NYU's new campus in Abu Dhabi, the Guggenheim Museum, the Louvre Museum, and on and on and on. The flip side of this, of course, with the increasing international tension, is bad PR. And the most important example of that is with camel jockeys. So for years, really since the first oil boom in the early 70s, they'd been using these 3- and 4-year-old boys from Sudan and Mauritius and Pakistan as camel jockeys. They would tie them to the backs of the camels, and later on with technological advancement, they'd Velcro them down. And they liked the 4-year-old boys because the 4-year-old boys, when they're riding the camels, they'd scream. And the high-pitched scream incited the camels to go even faster. Now, the Indian and Pakistani press had been reaming Dubai and the other Gulf states about this for years and years and years, and the Gulf states did absolutely nothing about it until, in 2004, HBO showed a documentary. They went and they showed these boys on these camels, and that caught the attention of the then U.S. ambassador at large for trafficking in persons, who took it really as a personal affront. He's a very religious man in the Bush administration, and he was offended by this, and almost like as his reaction, they put an end to the use of the camel jockeys, and they replaced them with robots with little riding crops and little jockey hats. So anyway, we can talk about PR and consumer culture later on if you like, but right now I want to talk about what I call the permanent impermanence of Dubai's migrant workers. One of the first weeks that I was in Dubai, I was on the helipad of one of these new swank apartment buildings in the Dubai Marina with a friend of mine, Vishal, in summer of '06 is when I was there. And we took in the panoramic nighttime view, 360 degrees of all these skyscrapers in the making with their cranes and everything unfinished. And Vishal looks around and he does this and he says, mockingly, "This is the future." But it wasn't a joke. Really, people believed that Dubai in 2006 was the future, and for the next 2 years, as the economy just exploded, it was already just booming by then, but 2007, 2008, it got so crazy that you couldn't even catch a taxi in Dubai. Like, you could not hail one. It was that packed with people and tourists and just money. And it really did look like Dubai was the future. And then our economy started to melt down in 2007. And in Dubai, they're looking at us and like, ha, suckers. Their economy was still humming. And then late 2008, whoosh, reality came. And it came crashing down. But until the meltdown, Dubai was the darling of the Western media and Western statesmen. You couldn't escape Bill Clinton talking about how Dubai was the model for the rest of the Muslim world to follow. It's like, look at Dubai. This is what you should be striving for. It was a capitalist, consumerist paradise that was tolerant of Western lifestyles. It was alternative lifestyles, and it was undisturbed by terrorism. It's the kind of eye in the storm. All this other stuff is going on around, but nothing in Dubai. Dubai was absolutely silent in that way. This city of the future, it's ruled over by what they like to call a benign autocrat, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, and again, it's populated mainly by foreigners. These expatriates, as the foreigners are called, they comprise over 90% of the population. They comprise 99% of the private sector workforce, and they also comprise over 90% of the public sector workforce. Everything that gets done in Dubai, essentially, and in large part in the Arabian Gulf generally, gets done by foreigners. And even in Saudi Arabia, where the local population is over 70%, all the work also gets done by foreigners. So this is what Dubai is. Because Dubai has been a migrant-receiving city since the early 1900s, this large foreign population is nothing new to them. In fact, even before the United Arab Emirates was incorporated as a country in 1971, and before the OPEC oil crisis, where the price of oil skyrockets, Dubai's population was already greater than 50%. Foreigners, mostly South Asians, but also to a lesser degree Iranians and some Arab expatriates. All expatriates in Dubai, again, are on short-term renewable visas, and I'm going to make this point probably a dozen times, so I apologize in advance. Unlike immigrant receiving countries like the US, UK, Canada, Germany, France, etc., Dubai has no structured form of immigrant incorporation. Even in countries that are as strict as Switzerland, migrants, including lower skilled guest workers, they can find roads to permanent settlement and family reunification, so things like a green card. So while guest workers and the children throughout Europe, they may find it difficult to acquire citizenship, they can still get the legal right to stay permanently, something that you cannot get in Dubai and in the Arabian Gulf generally. In Dubai, these expatriates, they willingly give up things like free speech and political rights and due process, and they live precariously on these short-term visas that can be revoked at any time and for any reason, and if they're revoked, it triggers immediate deportation. Pack your bags and leave, or sometimes don't pack your bags, just leave. For lower-level workers from developing countries, the trade-off includes the unstated promise that they're going to live and toil in harsh conditions in Dubai, which you may have read or seen on TV, so that they can send remittances, financial remittances, and make a better life for themselves back home. So Una, in her talk earlier, she talked, one of the questions was, why would these people do it? See, because they come to the US, they come to the Gulf for the specific reason of making money to send it there. Their lives are back there. Their lives are not here. And they live that way. So, for example, even here in the US, my uncle, he came here some 20 years or so ago he was doing construction illegally. He was here as an undocumented worker, and he did construction for some 10 odd years, living in the Bronx, renting a bed, essentially, right? He got the bed for 8 hours of the day, then he had to disappear. And he did this, and he just sent money back and money back and money back, and he lived in this horrible conditions in the Bronx to build a mansion, essentially, back in Hyderabad. And that's the point. And throughout the Gulf, all these workers know that. I mean, for my uncle, there's the possibility that he could have stayed. And in fact, after he built his mansion, stayed in Hyderabad, his application for his green card came through, and he took the family, and now he lives here in Chicago somewhere. So, but they know the whole purpose for these lower-level workers is to send remittances. That's what it's all about. Pretty much 90% of the story is about sending their remittances, and many of them remit 3/4 or more of their salaries. So they're not spending money on food in excess. They're not going out to clubs. They're not enjoying their lives there, because their lives aren't there. They're just working there. That's it. So anyway, the middle class, who are mainly South Asians and Arabs from outside of the Arabian Gulf, so Arabs from like Syria and Lebanon, people like that, places like that, they fill the bulk of lower and middle white-collar positions, and they're also enticed by better occupational possibilities, better schools, more comfortable family living, and a largely crime-free environment. For them, it's a means of upward mobility. So in places like Egypt, for instance, right, it's hard to get a good job unless you have connections. In India, it's hard to get a good job unless you have connections. Going to Dubai, one of the lures of Dubai is that if you're good, people will hire you, and you can make it. You can start a business, and there's no red tape. In India, everybody wants a piece of that action. In Dubai, bribery, corruption, they're there, but not even close to the degree that you find in these other developing world countries. So that's a big lure for business people to come to Dubai and start businesses. And for the upper class professionals who are Westerners, but are also a good chunk from South Asia and from other Arab countries, there's also the lure of the good life that's made Dubai very famous in the West, which is comprised of your cheap household help. Maids alone account for over 10% of the population. Luxury accommodations, the spas, clubs, bars, restaurants, outdoor sports, and prostitution. On its surface, the case of Dubai and its impermanent workforce may seem unique, but many Western countries are beginning to implement and expand similar types of restrictive guest worker programs that limit immigrants' abilities to stay, and they circumscribe many of their rights. And the case of Dubai's expatriates may actually be a kind of harbinger of the future of global migration. Now, the residence visas for expatriates in Dubai are tied to their sponsors, who are generally their employers, and again regulated through the kafala, which sponsorship system. Expatriates who are quit or fired, with few exceptions for professionals, they have to leave the country for a minimum 6-month ban period before they can return to take another job. So you get fired and you literally get a stamp in your passport that says ban. And this is a very common thing, and many people actually, they're used to it. They've been fired or they've been let go or quit their job. They take the ban stamp, they go back, relax for 6 months, and then they come back to Dubai for another job. But so long as you hold on to your job and you don't bring any negative tension to yourself, you can stay until the retirement age of 60, at which point you have to leave, or you can stay on a case-by-case basis for 1 year, 2 year extensions that are then looked at again. And one of the reasons for keeping it, for having these renewable visas is that, well, the government makes a lot of money on visa renewals, and especially if you limit it to 1 year, then that's more trips and more fees that are going to accrue. Laborers, the middle class, and professionals, they experience their temporariness differently. Laborers who are uniformly from the developing world, you're not going to find any Irish or any Americans doing construction work in Dubai. They're almost exclusively South Asians, and now increasingly Chinese are moving into the field of construction in Dubai. These include construction workers, maids, cabbies, lower-level service workers, and until a few years ago, again, the 4-year-old camel jockeys. They constitute the vast majority of Dubai's population, and they're highly regulated in their working and social lives. So if you think about our kind of class structure, it's this kind of, right, you have this bulging middle class, though the middle class is shrinking. In Dubai, it's really the bottom, which is huge, right? The bulk of the population is down there, servicing this kind of middle strata, partially this middle strata, and this like small elite population of Westerners, local Arabs, and other well-to-do expatriates. Once in Dubai, these workers often become modern-day bonded labor, and they're literally tied to their employers by the conditions of their labor permits and their residency visas. As a result of their occupational immobility, they're exposed to a very high degree of exploitation on the job. And this is structural, and it's nearly universal. And it's especially pronounced for live-in housemaids who not only have no rights, but they're not even covered by the one fig leaf of a labor law that they have in Dubai. They're excluded from even the minimal protections that construction workers get. These laborers, their passports are confiscated upon arrival, which is an illegal practice that even government ministries engage in, and which is just illegal. If you look at your passport, it doesn't say property of you. If it's an American passport, it says property of Department of State, right? It's not your passport. It has your name on it, but it's an American passport. Their wages are often withheld for months at a time to prevent them from quitting, a practice that the government tolerates. And for some maids, they're never paid at all. And their employers will kick them out, and then they'll file police charges against them, and they'll say that they're absconding. It's one of those wonderful British English words that they love to toss around in the Middle East and South Asia. And unions and strikes are, of course, illegal. Workers who've participated in strikes or protests have been immediately deported without trials or due process of any kind. Many men, especially construction workers, are housed in remote, overcrowded, filthy labor camps, and most of the rest of the working class share rooms in overcrowded, filthy, and dilapidated villas or apartment buildings. Socially, they don't fare much better. For example, construction workers are often denied entry into shopping malls that they themselves have built, and working class men are often harassed at the beaches by the police. Where the laborers' lives are largely regulated by sticks, the middle class and professionals are largely regulated by a series of carrots, like high salaries, fast professional advancement, and luxury living. The government doesn't need to enforce discipline on these people, as they're essentially living in a gilded cage. They willingly give up their political rights for economic possibilities. The thought of even saying anything remotely political doesn't cross anyone's mind, because they know to say something like that could lead to, a fast exit. The government is more than happy to allow expatriates wide latitude in social behaviors. For example, there's in Dubai, especially, there's freedom to worship as you like. So there's any number of churches in Dubai. There are Hindu temples in Dubai. Synagogues, no. But they don't deport people for being Jewish, and they don't not allow people in who are Jewish. And in fact, even though there's a restriction on Israeli passport holders coming, because Israelis are very central to the diamond industry, and because Dubai is a player in the diamond industry, Israeli citizens do come over on their passports, just in a very kind of hush-hush way. They get shipped in, they go into the diamond exchange, do the thing, back and forth. It's not a big deal, because money trumps everything in Dubai. Right. Dubai, in particular, has gone out of its way to create a consumer culture that caters directly to every whim and fancy that a purchaser may have, while it works hard to prevent most signs of civil society. So just normal types of civic organizations that you would have anywhere in the world are very strikingly absent from Dubai. And even the thought of starting a civil organization is really not something that people or most people are willing to even think of. And the middle class and the upper classes are perfectly happy to live in such a consumerist paradise. A young British lawyer, he put it this way, he said, "We live in a bubble, a kind of fantasy world of luxury living, and if you want it, endless partying." And that's really the bottom line, is that it's a fantastic place to live, so long as you keep your mouth shut. While the professionals, and to a lesser extent the middle class, they find a great degree of social freedom, in the end, like laborers, they're also merely factors of production. They're there to create wealth for the ruler, for the government, and for the national citizen population. The kafala system, it essentially defines the bulk of the population as temporary and as disposable. And it's not accidental that the government insists on calling expatriates as guest workers rather than migrants. A high-ranking government official, he made this point very clearly when he said the whole reason contractual labor laws are used is so that workers fall under contractual law rather than immigration law. So there's a whole back and forth between Dubai and the Gulf states with the International Organization of Migration, and they're insisting these people are migrants, and Dubai's like, no, 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 they're guest workers. They're just here on contract. And once their contract's up, they will leave. The fact that you can renew your contract for 30, 40 years, right, on and on and on, doesn't really fall into their way of thinking. The transience of expatriates is underscored by the fact there's no such thing as permanent residence, and it's extremely difficult to become a national citizen. It happens. Some people have attained citizenship, but very, very few. Government officials routinely say they can't give citizenship or permanent residence because of the threats of cultural extinction and because of demographic imbalance. Again, less than 10% are local citizens, over 90% are expatriates, and this is repeated throughout the Gulf, except for Oman and Saudi Arabia, which have majority local populations. However, there are two critical but unstated factors that are central to the management of expatriates in Dubai and the government's stance on naturalization. The first is that the government's legitimacy depends to a large extent on its ability to guarantee a very high standard of living for its national citizens. A former UK ambassador to the UAE, he put it best, he said the social contract is you get things given to you by the sheikh, and in return the sheikh, you give the sheikh your allegiance. Right, it's very much a quid pro quo. Letting expatriates naturalize, it might lead to the state having to spread its welfare largesse among a much larger swath of population, which Abu Dhabi could afford. They have 10% of the world's known oil reserves, but Dubai has actually very little oil. Their entire economic edifice is, in some ways, a house of cards. Right, it's built on debt, and when the banks came calling, they had to go to Abu Dhabi for $10 billion and then a $20 billion loan, and then the Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest building, it was originally called the Burj Dubai, and then in its unveiling, it was announced this is the Burj Khalifa. And it was done in such secrecy without even knowing anybody that the official website for 2 days afterwards still said Burj Dubai. Right? It was very much a last-minute decision to give over the name. Right. So if the sheikhs fail to provide thoroughly for their subjects, if they're not keeping up their end of the sheikhly bargain, one possibility is that the people might not keep up their end of the bargain and start to resist and start to not support them. And this you can see most clearly in Bahrain, right, where the Sunnis have been supported, but not so much the Shias, and this is the mess that they're in now. Anyway, the second part is that the kafala system, it provides a simple and effective mechanism of social control. So as expatriates are in Dubai primarily to work, the mere possibility of deportation is enough to stifle any kind of threat that this may pose to the political economic order. Now, just to kind of go on a sidetrack, many scholars argue that formal legal citizenship is becoming less important in this increasingly globalized world. As money, goods, and ideas and people move further and faster, than they ever have, the idea is that legal and social barriers to movement have weakened. And you see this with things like the idea of dual citizenship, right? The possibility of dual or even triple citizenship or quadruple citizenship. Some investors from Hong Kong, for example, they collect passports the way that some of us collect knickknacks, right? They have like 5, 10 passports. And this idea of dual citizenship is much more widely accepted than it ever has, and it erodes the historical notion that citizenship is about having loyalty to a particular place. And this idea of dual citizenship gives lie to that idea. Even illegal migrants can often become legal in many places by proving that they've conducted themselves like good citizens in their new land. Now, the literature on citizenship, it's expanded in recent years to take into consideration how the boundaries of the nation state have become literally and figuratively more permeable and in some ways less relevant over time. International treaties and institutions, especially those that make human rights universal, and the free movement of people and capital greatly affect the sovereignty of states and how they relate to citizens and non-citizens that live within their borders. So over the past 20 years, you have terms like post-national citizenship, flexible citizenship, and denationalized citizenship have become very popular in the literature. And while there are major differences between these concepts and other similar ideas that expand upon the idea of what is and who is a citizen, taken together, they basically say that the idea of citizen is more than simply a legal category, and that people can claim to belong to a place without actually belonging to that place. But, I counter, legal citizenship and the realistic possibility of attaining it is still important, right? Being a citizen of a place is still important because you cannot legally and securely live in a place without a proper visa or without citizenship. And in the Arabian Gulf, citizenship, again, is particularly important given the extent of the welfare state. If you're a citizen, you have access to these things. If you're not, well, you don't. While there certainly are many dimensions to citizenship beyond the formal legal ideas, such as psychological and consumer citizenship, etc., these are largely meaningless without formal legal standing. Another way to say it is a basic factor of being a citizen means that you generally can't be deported from your place. Right? It's very, very difficult to do it. And if you get deported, these other forms of citizenship become moot. How are you a citizen of the U.S. if you can't live there? Right? What does it mean to be a cultural citizen of the U.S. if you've been booted out of the country? It's a meaningless statement. So, and this is something that expatriates in Dubai, most of whom are from the developing world, they understand very, very well. While there's no publicly available data on the number of deportations, they occur frequently enough that the stories of deportees are widely known to expatriates, they're widely repeated, and they serve as cautionary tales to keep laborers, middle class, and professional expatriates in line. And so even though many people may not know someone immediately who's been deported, they all know stories. And everybody who I talked to had some story about deportation, like 1 or 2 degrees removed from themselves, or many family members who are deported for various reasons. So these expatriates, they're more careful to stay out of trouble with the police. They make certain not to engage in behavior that might look in any way political. And they avoid criticism of the ruling family and national citizens in general. Get angry on the road, a little bit of road rage, you flash a finger to a national in the car next to you. Next day, you're deported. Write a letter to the editor that is something a little bit unacceptable, you find yourself deported, right? There are any number of reasons, or no reason. You can just be deported. So that really impacts about how people live their lives in Dubai. So the threat of deportation and the lack of any legal recourse, you can't, there's no going to the court saying, don't deport me, right? It's done. The lack of any legal recourse is one reason why so many expatriates will welcome the possibility of citizenship, or at the very least, permanent residence. Without these possibilities, expatriates understand that their stay in Dubai, no matter how long-term it may be, 30, 40 years on, is temporary. And even people who are born there on residency, on three-year visas, right there. If you're born in Dubai to Pakistani parents, you have a Pakistani passport. There's no, there are no, what are they called? Anchor babies. There are no anchor babies in Dubai. Your passport is that of your parents. Okay, so these expatriates who are born and brought up in Dubai, like Vishal, who I mentioned at the very beginning, they fully understand that they're temporary residents, that they're not going to become legally Dubaians or UAEans. And it affects how they conceive themselves in Dubai. A young Indian corporate headhunter, he bluntly told me, he said, Dubai is a pit stop, a place where you come, you make a good amount of money, and you get out. And this is something that I expected to hear from, you know, somebody who'd been there 3-4 years, came just for the job, make money, and get out. But this guy had been born in Dubai, and until a couple of weeks before I met him, he'd never left Dubai. He'd never left the United Arab Emirates. His entire life was in this country. And for him, it was a pit stop. And this idea of Dubai as a pit stop, like when he told me this, it just really kind of stopped me dead in my tracks. It made me rethink this whole idea of assimilation and migration and what it means to be in a place like that. And it led me to the next part of the stories of Dubai's migrant stories, which is the notion of transnational behavior that I think Virginia and Una mentioned earlier, or the ways that many people engage in economic, political, cultural, and religious practices that span multiple national borders. Given forces of globalization, it's not surprising that many migrants today have sustained business, social, and other relations in multiple countries, especially with their home countries, and especially given the ease of communication and travel, right? Quick flight, quick phone call, etc. A more interesting question, though, is whether this is also the case with the children, the second generation migrants, especially the adults. So when Una was talking about, you know, this maintaining ties, I'm assuming, she didn't specify, but that she's talking about first-generation migrants, right? So people like my parents who left their country and came here. But what about their kids? Am I going to maintain ties with, you know, these family members in Hyderabad in India that, you know, I've been there 3 times in my life? Am I going to send back money to these people? Am I going to go back and visit them when my parents are dead? That's an open question, and the scholarship on this particular branch of transnationalism is very young, but it largely says, well, not so much, a little bit. They're trying to make the case for it by saying, well, they send emails to their cousins. It's like, well, I'm not convinced. I don't find that really be convincing. But in Dubai, there is a very high degree. In fact, it's to the same degree as their parents. It may not be with their home countries. So the person from Lagos who's born in Dubai is maybe not having the same kinds of ties with Lagos and people in Lagos that their parents are, but they do have ties to other places, right? So they do have ties to London, or they do have ties to New York, because for the most part, these people did not go to school in Dubai, university, I mean. I should say here that if you're a second-generation migrant in Dubai, that means that your parents have some means. There's an income requirement to have family members with you. So by definition, all second-generation migrants in the Gulf are middle class or more. More generally, upper middle class. So, so the same forces that kind of promote transnationalism among the first generation, right, this idea of impermanence, it applies in the same way to the second generation. They can't stay there, ever, even if they're born there. And there are people who are third generation. Some of the gold merchants in Dubai are third generation, right? So the parents came, the children stayed, and they had children. But even those people are impermanent, and they know, right? They have that same kind of mental frame. We're going to have to go. Even if they don't, they still have to think, we're going to have to go at some point. Jamie, am I doing okay on time? Am I running low? Okay. Okay. So anyway, a major difference between these expatriates and other global migrants regarding migration choices is the sheer scale of migratory behavior. Most of the people that I interviewed while I was in Dubai, South Asian Arab expatriates and some European expatriates, British mostly, they had studied and worked abroad multiple times, right? They'd studied and they worked abroad, they came back, many of them had left and come back again. So they'd come back and forth many, many times. And one thing that was very interesting was that, especially for the South Asian and Arab migrants, a lot of them had Western passports or had Western residency, or they aspired to have Western passports and Western residency, because they didn't want to go to Pakistan. They didn't want to go to Egypt. They didn't want to go to India. They wanted to push on, right? Because Pakistan is a foreign country to them. They couldn't live there. Dubai is not legally their place. They can't stay there. And so for them, the realistic, the best choice is to move on to the US, to Canada, to Australia, or wherever. So most of the people I talked to had Western residency. Many of them had Western passports. Some of them had multiple Western passports, 2, sometimes 3 Western passports, in addition to their home country passports. And this really affected kind of patterns of assimilation, right? So we think of assimilation, right? The first generation comes, second generation stay, but these people, they can't stay. They have nothing to assimilate to. So they know that they're going to leave at some point. So they're very much transnationals. The Indian headhunter who talked about Dubai as a pit stop, he said, basically we're not going to stay. Simply, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, and the nationals run this place, and what they say is law, and it created a sense of uneasiness for them. He said, you can't live in a country knowing in some sort of subconscious level that you aren't safe here. I don't mean that you're going to be mugged in the street, it's just that you can't make this your home, right? And that notion of home kept coming up and up again in interviews I did with people. It's like, we are not from here. We're not of here, and we don't belong here. Some people would make a claim to it, be like, oh, I've worked here my whole life, I've contributed as much as any national, but even still, in the end, they say, yeah, well, I'm going to go to Britain. I'm going to go to New York. I'm going to go to Toronto, right? That was always the next part of the thing. So then skip a bit, talk about why people are in Dubai, and part of it, for these second generation migrants, would be the same reasons why you or I would go to Dubai. There's the good life, for the professionals, or professional advancement, but there's also this idea of family. But even the idea of family is very contingent. So people who go and people who come back, their parents are going to leave at some point. So I met a lot of people who they had come back to Dubai and work, but their parents had left. So their parents had gone to India. But they had no plans to go to India or go to Egypt or go, wherever. There's one Egyptian nurse I talked to, I said, well, what would happen if tomorrow they canceled your visa and you had to go back to Egypt? She's like, oh my God, please don't say that. It's like going to Egypt is nice for a visit, but it's really not some place that I would want to live in. So this was a very, kind of common attitude that I came across among these people. On there. Finish up? Okay. Well, all right. So this idea of the one thing just to expand on the idea of assimilation. So when I was interviewing these people in Dubai, and I was looking at this kind of negative space of assimilation, right? Non-assimilation. It was what I was doing in a way was contrasting it with the case of assimilation here in the U.S. And I've been doing actually the stuff on assimilation in the U.S. for a lot longer than Dubai. Dubai was just kind of this project that happened accidentally. But the second generation migrants in Dubai, I was contrasting with second generation migrants here in the U.S. And one of the things that I'm interested in is the more theoretical aspect is why do people assimilate, and how do people assimilate? And one of I think it was Virginia brought up the Alejandro Portes and this idea of segmented assimilation. And probably all of you have a large number of migrants, second generation, 1.5 generation, whatever, in your classrooms, and I do too. I teach at an open admission university in Brooklyn, and the bulk of my student body are first generation college students, and almost half of them are immigrants, either first, 1.5, or second generation themselves. And one of the things that I'm very interested in is what's the mechanism of assimilation? And why do some people assimilate? And when we talk about assimilation, we're talking really two parts. One is cultural assimilation, becoming American culturally, and one is economic assimilation. And really what they mean by that is, are you becoming middle class? Are you maintaining your middle class status? Most scholars will deny that that's what it's about, but really it's a story of upward mobility. And the contrast case is African Americans, is blacks, poor blacks, right? How do immigrants fare relative to poor blacks is really the broad story here. And the causes, the storylines have generally been things like, ethnic background, the way that groups have been received. So who's it, Una brought up the Mariel boat lift in 1980. One of the things that people have been looking at with Cubans is that the people who came in the boat lift and after were black Cubans. The people who came before were what they call white Cubans, right? So the reception of the black and the white Cubans has been vastly different, and the economic and educational achievement has been vastly different. And so the question is, why? Right? Why, why do Indians fare better than Haitians? Why do Jamaicans fare better than, other groups? And the storyline has been racism, it's been ethnic background, it's been parents, human capital, so how educated are your parents, how much money do your parents have? But the one thing that I've been thinking about in my latest project, just to abandon Dubai altogether, is looking at variation within a group. So all these variables, most of the variables that people talk about are at the intergroup level. So why Cubans do better than Haitians, for example? Well, what happens if you look just at Haitians? There's a great degree of variation among Haitians, right? Why some Haitians than others? You can't explain it with racism because they're all facing racism. You can't explain it with ethnicity because they're all Haitian. Well, okay, parents' background. But is parents' background enough to explain all the variation? It's one variable. And I didn't think that that was a very satisfying explanation. So the latest thing that I've been doing is looking at assimilation of second-generation Turks in Western Europe. So I have a friend of mine in the Netherlands had access to this Europe-wide data set. And the theory that we had is that peers are the most important causal variable. Who you hang out with is going to affect who you become. And we ran the numbers, and we were right. And Portes, who she had mentioned, and Portes is like the granddaddy of assimilation studies today, he's wrong. It's not parents, it's peers. And we ran the numbers, who your peers were in the past and who your peers are at the present, just stomp on what your parents do and what your parents are. Think of it another way. If you have 3 kids in a family, and one is a junkie, and one is a Nobel Prize winner, how do you explain it? Right? How do you explain it with parents? Because the parents' social capital is the same. Well, that leaves out, that variable's gone. Peers, to me, is really the more interesting variable. And when we ran the numbers, it worked. So I'll end there. Thanks. She asked if how prevalent is intermarriage, and is it allowed, and how prevalent it is. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Between the natives and the expatriates.
Right. Between local citizens and expatriates. It is allowed. It is discouraged, and they discourage it with, again, carrots and sticks. So the carrot is if you are a local male and you marry a local female, you get 70,000 US. They have a marriage fund specifically for this, for the first wife. You don't get it for the second wife. So there's a lot of money involved. If you marry an expatriate, you don't get that money. If you are a woman, a female local, and you marry a male foreigner, you not only don't get that money, but your children are not citizens. They lose their citizenship rights. So what you have in the UAE now is you have a lot of problems with what they call it spinsterhood, right? You have a lot of these women who just can't get married because and also the Arab custom is bride price. So where the men give the women dowries, and local men increasingly can't afford to pay that price for local women, even with the $70,000 marriage fund. So they, in some ways, don't have a choice but to marry, a Syrian girl or a, Egyptian girl or whatever. So yeah, it's in fact I think the marriage rate may be higher for maybe more out marriage, more marrying expatriates than there is of marrying locals. Yeah.
There's several here, but I'll do it one at a time. So at what level satisfies are you to be able to bring your family? I'm assuming construction workers don't bring families with them.
Right.
So at what point can you bring your family?
You have to have an income, a declared income of 10,000 real, which is like 2,500 US dollar a month minimum. It used to be 1,000 US dollar, and then they raised it to 2,500.
And then yesterday, one of the speakers was talking about if you're Haitian in the Dominican Republic and are born there, you can't even get a birth certificate there, so you're basically stateless. Is that a problem in terms of being born in Dubai?
No, Oh, sorry. She asked if you're born in Dubai, in the DR, if you're a Haitian, you're born in the DR, you're essentially stateless. You can't even get a birth certificate. In Dubai, how does it work? I don't know if they give you a birth certificate, but you certainly register with your embassy and you get a passport through your embassy.
If you're injured there, or construction worker, is there any kind of compensation, like workers' compensation, for rehabilitation, et cetera? Is there anything that protects these workers?
Technically, there are protections and there are funds, but in reality, there's very little. Yeah, I mean, if you get hurt on the job, that's too bad for you. You may get an emergency room visit and
Is healthcare public there?
for locals. So local citizens get free health care. Expatriates have to pay.
And if you aren't a citizen, can you buy housing there that you can then later?
They started. So this was the big reason for the economic boom. Sorry. Sorry. Can you buy, if you're not a local, can you buy property in Dubai? And this is the reason why you have the economic boom was they opened up the property market in 2002, 2003, and 2002, I think. And then almost immediately it took off because there was all this wealth, especially after 9/11, a lot of money in that area that was coming here no longer could cross the borders. So you had all this money pooling up in the Middle East with nowhere to go, and now you have this property market that's just open, and it just immediately took off. And in fact, everything that Dubai became really rested on the property market. Uh-huh.
What's the language of business?
The language of business is English. Yeah, the most spoken language is Urdu. So it'll be difficult to even use Arabic in Dubai. Like if you want to catch a cab, you have to speak Urdu. Yeah.
Except for the native Dubaians and maybe in the upper circle, how do the rest of the Dubaians live? It sounds like they have everything being taken care of all over, then top to bottom or outside or something. What's up with that?
So how did the local citizens live who are not elites? They live quite well. The average. No. Well, no, sorry. The average UAE citizen male citizen gets roughly something on the order of 50,000 US in welfare benefits a year. In addition to like occasional things like when you get married, you get a plot of land and you get an interest-free loan to pay your house, which you may or may not pay back because what bank is going to be able to collect on you? In terms of work, the biggest sector is government, and they're basically no-show jobs, or they're little-show jobs, and you go in and you work 4, 5, 6 hours, maybe not, and then you go home and you do very little work, and then you have this kind of shadow employment of where you have a Pakistani or an Indonesian or somebody actually doing the work that you were supposed to do. And in Kuwait, actually, it's a big deal. They call them ghost workers in Kuwait, and the Kuwaiti government is trying to crack down on it, but with no luck. And it's the same thing in Dubai. So they actually try to. So they're kind of smart about this. They realize that the money is not going to. We can't fund this forever. This type of living. So they've been really promoting through affirmative action programs what they call nationalization of certain. So they want to get a lot more locals working in the banks, and they tried to do it for things like cab drivers and secretaries, but they couldn't get anyone to work as a cab driver or secretary because why would you do that when it pays so little and you're already getting so much in the way of economic benefits? So they live well without working. So, yeah. Oh.
What's the population?
Of Dubai?
Yeah, of the
Of the citizens? Well, the total population is anywhere from 1.5 million to 2 million, depending on who's counting. So let's say 2 million, and of that, about 10% is local at most, closer to 5%. They've only just now, right now, they're engaged in doing a proper census. They never did a proper census before. So all the numbers before have been rough guesstimates. Mm-hmm.
There's like a kind of like a gap between like a history or shared sense of like culture and identity that guitars have just basically lost like
Mm-hmm.
identity. Like, do you find that this is by is like is there cultural identity?
The question is, how is like this really quick boom, right? This fast growth affected cultural identity among, and so, and she's saying in Qatar, she read that they basically bought identity. Is that what you? Yeah. In Dubai, what you have in terms of public culture, you don't see anything that's local, right? So you go to Dubai, and it looks like anywhere else. It's just generic, right? That you have no sense that you're even in an Arab place, and it didn't really hit me. Like I'd never been to like an Arab city until I went to Dubai, and then I went on a little short vacation. I went to Cairo, and I was just amazed. I'm like, wow, there's architecture and mosques, and people speak Arabic, and like nobody speaks Arabic in Dubai except locals and the Arab expats. But it's not something that you need to know. Emirati culture, local culture, is private, essentially. I mean, they obviously have culture and customs, and they've been around for a long time, but it's not a public shared culture, in the way that it is in Saudi Arabia, you would know you're in an Arab land, you're in Saudi Arabia, but in Dubai, you have no idea, what you're in. But they have it, and it was interesting. One of the guys who, in terms of assimilation, I met one guy, an Indian guy, who when he grew up, he basically grew up like an Emirati, because all his friends his best friends were Emirati, and they just kind of took him into their fold. So he spoke Emirati Arabic with an Emirati accent, and he wore a kandur, and he dressed like them, and he was one of them. And that's something that hardly any expats get brought into. Even Arab expats don't get brought into the fold that way. And so he was exposed firsthand into this culture. And he made this point to me. He's like, you go to Syria and you see the glass blowing and all that, and you see this. You can see culture, but in Dubai, it's such a young city. I mean, there's no building there that survived from before 1950, except for this one rinky-dink little fort in the old part of town. Right? There's nothing visually. And there's, so it's all in the house in private.
Thank you.
Thanks.